have we got a crazy ride in store today. Today we're going to be talking about Pee-wee. No, not that one. Though Paul Rubens did make some very questionable decisions through his lifetime. No, we're going to be looking at the textbook example of small man syndrome. Donald Pee-wee Gaskins was a small man with a massive fuck-off chip on his shoulder. His crimes spanned nearly 3 decades. He had numerous MOs, and yet he's still not remarkably well known among notorious killers. This is the story of Pee-wee Gaskins, and this is Murder of Crows. Donald Henry Gaskins was born on March the 13th, 1933. As the last in a string of illegitimate children born to Eulia Parrott. I hesitate to use the term mother for reasons that will become clear. He was only about 4 pounds when he was born, and he was given the nickname of Pee-wee very early, and he remained diminutive for the rest of his life, only growing to about 5'2" or 5'3". His childhood was, frankly, a giant shit sandwich, characterized by significant neglect. When he was just a year old, he drank a bottle of kerosene, and as a result suffered seizures until he was 3 years old. Given his size, presumably he had to find ways to stand out among his peers and siblings, with no encouragement or boundaries from his mother. So he soon developed street smarts and the ability to manipulate others. But despite a superficial charm and charisma that made him an effective con man, he was more than willing to turn to violence to get what he wanted. And this included assaults and a gang rape by the ripe old age of 13. Such was the extent of his mother's neglect that Gaskins only found out his actual given names at his first court appearance. While still aged just 13, he broke into a home, and when a young woman caught him inside the home, he hit her in the head with an axe. For this, he was sentenced to 5 years in the South Carolina Industrial School, which was a reform school, and while there he was raped regularly by other inmates. Not the best start to life, in fairness. After this mundane start to life, things started to get interesting in Gaskins' life. He escaped from the reform school for a while, got married while he was out, as you do, then returned to the reform school to voluntarily complete his sentence. Got to praise that honeymoon period, haven't you? He was released from the reform school when he was 18 in 1951. He worked on a tobacco plantation. But his fresh start was short-lived, as he was arrested again in 1953 for attacking a woman with a hammer for a perceived insult. He was sentenced to 6 years in the South Carolina penitentiary. Perhaps in an effort to escape any stereotyping on account of his size, he proceeded to kill an inmate named Hazel Brazel. I promise you it's not a pantomime name. And this was significant since Brazel was the most feared inmate. So in doing this, Gaskins gained respect inside the prison. Gaskins claimed this was a case of self-defense, but he was still convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to an additional 3 years in prison. But never one to take the easy road, Gaskins escaped the prison in the back of a rubbish truck and fled to Florida to work with a travelling carnival. I swear you could not write this shit if it wasn't true. After a brief taste of freedom, he was rearrested and sent back to prison, though he would ultimately be paroled in August of 1961. Perhaps as a result of shying away from violence after being paroled, Gaskin turned to burglary and fencing. No, not this fencing, the fencing of stolen goods. But he couldn't fight his own rage and sadism for long, and after raping a 12-year-old girl, he was arrested again, but escaped again while awaiting sentencing. He was rearrested in Georgia and sentenced to 8 years in prison. He was paroled from this particular time in 1968, and after his release he relocated to Sumter in South Carolina, and perhaps in an attempt to go straight, began working for a roofing company. Now this is when the crimes really start. By which I mean the murders outside of the prison environment. Now the next couple of years are something of a grey area, and we have only Gaskin's own account of his actions during this time. But according to him, he embarked on a series of coastal kills, where he would kill primarily hitchhikers while driving the highways of the American South. By his account, he would kill roughly every 6 weeks to get rid of feelings of bothersomeness. While he claims to have killed up to 90 people using a range of methods, including strangulation and stabbing, and even claiming to have cannibalized some of those victims. Again, from his own mouth, he claims that the first of this series was a blonde hitchhiker in 1969, and he allegedly killed both men and women purely for enjoyment. But none of the stories from this time in his life have ever been confirmed or corroborated. The first confirmed killings attributed to Gaskins outside of prison were those of his niece, 15-year-old Janice Kirby, and her 17-year-old friend Patricia Allsbrook in November of 1970. He beat both girls to death, claiming that their drug use sent him into a rage. But it was alleged by others that he was attempting to sexually assault both girls. The next confirmed kill was that of Martha Ann Dix, and this happened in either 1971 or 1972. Again, there is a difference of opinion on why he did this, with some claiming it was because he was accused of being the father of her unborn child, others claiming it was because she was going to marry a woman and move to Texas, and a third theory being that she was a drug dealer who had supplied the drugs to his niece and her friend. Whatever the reason, her bones were eventually found in a ditch. But those bones were lost after they were given to a university for study. Well, that's pretty fucking careless. How do you lose a whole bloody skeleton? The next two murders, those of 22-year-old Doreen Dempsey and her 2-year-old daughter Robin in 1973, were racially motivated. Doreen herself was white, but her daughter Robin was biracial, and Doreen was pregnant again to an African-American man, and in a rage, Gaskins drowned Doreen and Robin in his backyard pond, as you do. In 1974, Gaskins killed a criminal associate called Johnny Sellers, who was 36 years old. And he was killed execution style, being shot in the back of the head. He then stabbed 22-year-old Jessie Judy, who was Sellers' girlfriend, to stop her telling authorities anything she may know about Gaskins' activities. It was thought that Sellers was killed for asking for money that Gaskins owed him, prompting what was, of course, by now a typical Gaskins rage. 1975 was significant for two reasons. It was Gaskins' most prolific year in terms of confirmed killings, but was also the year that he was arrested for the last time. In February, he slit the throat of Silas Yates in a murder-for-hire plot where Gaskins was paid $1,500 by Susan Kipper Owens and her husband John Owens after a dispute with Yates, who was Susan's ex-boyfriend. Forensics showed that Yates' throat was cut with a knife, but Gaskins insisted it was a karate chop. Chuck Norris, you are not, Pee-wee. 13-year-old Kim Gelkins threatened to tell authorities that she had been trafficked by Gaskins from North Charleston for sexual abuse by several men, including Gaskins himself. As a result, Gaskins stabbed her to death. Diane Bellamy Neely, aged 25, and her boyfriend Avery Howard, who was 36, were killed because, like some of the others, Gaskins feared what they knew and what they might tell authorities. Dennis Bellamy and John Henry Knight, who were 27 and 15 years old respectively, and were siblings of Diane Bellamy Neely, they were killed by Gaskins in an arms deal gone wrong. So there was an attempt to buy and sell guns, and it all went tits up, it seems. In November of 1975, Walter Neely, a criminal associate of Gaskins and also the estranged husband of Diane Bellamy Neely, confessed to police of having knowledge of Gaskins killing Dennis Bellamy and John Henry Knight, and that he also had information regarding the disposal of several earlier victims. When police searched a site near Gaskins' home in Prospect, they found the remains of 8 people. On May the 24th, 1976, Gaskins was tried and convicted on one charge of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death. But this was commuted to life in prison shortly after the trial, as South Carolina was bringing its death penalty guidelines into line with those of other states. So the death penalty was not abolished, but there were more stringent rules for its imposition. Now, despite being sentenced to life in prison, Gaskins wasn't done yet. And in 1982, he delivered his coup de grace. A fellow inmate was alleged to have murdered convenience store owners Bill and Myrtle Moon during a robbery. Tony Seymour was the son of the Moons, and he hired Gaskins to assassinate the alleged murderer. Rudolph Tyner was already on death row for murdering the Moons, but he was appealing, and Seymour wanted a more personal hand in the revenge. Now, murder is always despicable. Having said that, the following plot was absolute fucking criminal genius. After several failed attempts to poison Tyner, Gaskins arranged for Seymour to smuggle in some C4 to the prison inside the heel of a shoe. Then he made a radio-like device that Gaskins told Tyner would allow communication between cells. He told Tyner to hold the device to his ear at an agreed time, and at that time, Gaskins detonated the device using a power outlet. Gaskins later said of Tyner, "The last thing he heard was me laughing." Gaskins was tried for Tyner's murder and was actually sentenced to death this time. It was the first time in the history of South Carolina that a white man was sentenced to death for the murder of a black man. Gaskins was ultimately executed on September the 6th, 1991 at 1:10 a.m. in the electric chair, coming just hours after he tried to kill himself by slitting his wrists. His last words were, "I'll let my lawyers talk for me. I'm ready to go." So that there was the batshit crazy story of Pee Wee Gaskins. I would imagine that he killed far more than the 15 confirmed victims, but equally Gaskins was prone to exaggeration, so it was probably less than the 120 or so that he claimed. Suffice to say, he was a sadistic and crazy bastard, with little regard for the lives of other people. This video is dedicated to the known and unknown victims of Pee Wee Gaskins, who were unfortunate enough to cross the very small-footed path of this aggressive hobbit that went by the name of Donald Gaskins. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve. This is my Lord and Master Samson, and we will see you when we see you.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it, you say